We're talking about disclaimers. What if just a few lines of text or a quick spoken sentence or two could help protect you and your podcast and your everything, really, from legal trouble? No, that's not hype. It's not exaggeration, because while a disclaimer isn't a suit of armor, it's not a magic wand, it can be a really powerful shield if it's crafted properly and used the right way. And today, more than ever, podcast disclaimers aren't just smart, they're necessary. And oh, you might actually need more than one. So let's talk about why. Hey there, and welcome to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, your host, helping creators like you build podcasts that aren't just powerful, but also profitable and legally protected every step of the way. If you are a podcaster, content creator, a blogger, or really even just thinking about starting one of these things, this episode is going to save you a lot of headaches. Today, we're diving into a detail that a lot of creators overlook: disclaimers, or more accurately, disclaimers plural. These are the short statements that can keep you out of hot water, but too often creators will skip these things, assuming that they're just for the big shows, or they'll paste one in without even knowing if it's really suited to the situation. And all of that is risky business. If you want help writing a disclaimer the right way, I've got a free resource for you. It's over at gordonfiremark.com/disclaimer guide. And you can come on over and grab my free guide. And here's my disclaimer: I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. So until you hire me as your lawyer, you're going to want to treat this as general advice and education and information, and do your own due diligence and engage someone to give you custom tailored advice specific to your situation. All right, so let's break down what disclaimers are, why they matter more now than ever in 2025, and how to write the right ones for your show. So what is a disclaimer really? Well, let's get this clear up front. It's a short legal statement that tells your audience what your content is and what it isn't. It helps to limit your liability. It helps to manage your audience's expectations. And in some cases, it can reduce your legal exposure if a listener tries to claim that you misled them. Now, a disclaimer is not always the same as a disclosure, which is where you tell your audience if you're being paid or have affiliate relationships or receiving something of value, those kinds of things. And it's also not a substitute for website terms of service and privacy policies. Those things live on your website, and they cover things like how you use your content, how they can use your content, cookies, data collection, what's allowed, what's not allowed on the website, and things like that. Now, a disclaimer is about setting up boundaries. It's about saying something essentially: I'm sharing this for informational purposes. Excuse me. It's not advice for your specific situation. Don't rely on it without doing your own homework or getting help from a qualified pro. And here's a basic example. The content of this podcast is provided for general information purposes only and doesn't constitute legal, financial, medical, or other professional advice. Listeners really should consult their own advisors before taking action. Seems simple, right? But it's surprisingly powerful, especially when it's tailored to the kind of content you are generating. So why do you need one now, or one or more now in 2025? Well, it's more important than ever because we're in a moment where content is getting more complex, more AI enhanced, more widely distributed, and more easily misunderstood. Let's say you run a health and wellness podcast. You're not a doctor, but you've read a lot, you share natural remedies, and you talk about supplements. Someone listens to your advice, stops taking their prescribed medication, and experiences some kind of a medical issue. That was not your intent, but it could still result in legal trouble if you didn't make clear that your podcast shouldn't be treated as a substitute for real medical care. Or maybe you host a business show and you say something like, I invested in XYZ crypto and I made 200% in 6 months. I highly recommend it. Well, if a listener follows your lead and loses money, they might blame you. And if you're not clearly stating that your content isn't intended as investment advice, well, they might actually have a leg to stand on. And if you're not a licensed dealer broker and you haven't said so, that could be an issue too. So let's be honest. Listeners don't always hear things in context. They might jump into your show mid-series or mid-episode. They might misinterpret your tone or share a clip out of context. Disclaimers help keep expectations grounded. So the big takeaway is that you might need multiple disclaimers, not just one. One for general advice, one for the guest's content. The opinions of our guests are not those of our hosts or producers, right? One for affiliate links, that's a disclosure. One for industry-specific topics. Your podcast might touch on various things: legal, business, wellness, mindset, or even news. Each of those carries different kinds of risks, and that means different types of disclaimers. So let's talk about a few of the common types of podcast disclaimers, break down some of the most common language and when you would want to use them. First off is this isn't professional advice. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It doesn't constitute professional advice. Always consult a qualified professional about your specific situation. There's the sample language. Use this kind of thing if you talk about law, medicine, finance, or mental health. Here's another. The views are my own. Guest opinions. Maybe it's a quote that says, "The views expressed in this podcast are those of the host and the guests and do not reflect the views of any affiliated organizations, sponsors, or employers." This will protect you when the guest goes off script or if your employer or sponsor could be affected by something you said on air. Or maybe here's one for entertainment only, right? This disclaimer, the sample might say, "This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. Nothing contained in the show should be construed as fact or professional advice." You might also want to follow it up with, "Don't try this at home if you're doing weird stunt kinds of things." But this is going to be essential for comedy shows, commentary, pop culture, satire, those kinds of things. And you do need those disclosures if you're doing affiliate content or sponsored material, those kinds of things. You might want to say, "Some of the links in our show notes are affiliate links, and if you click and purchase, we may receive a commission at no extra cost to you." This is not just a best practice. This one is legally required. If you're making money from links or promotions, the FTC here in the US does require that those disclaimers exist. There's also the "your mileage may vary" disclaimer. This is the individual results may vary. What worked for our guest or for us may not produce the same results for you. If you are sharing case studies, success stories, if you're talking about revenue earnings, things like that, this is a must. It'll help prevent unrealistic expectations from the audience. Now, each of these plays a different role, so pick and choose. Use the ones that apply to your content, and don't assume it's going to be the same from episode to episode. Depending on your guest, depending on the subject matter, it's okay to mix and match and stack them up on the episode. There is no rule saying you only get one chance to do a disclaimer. Okay, so now let's talk about where you're going to place these disclaimers. Here's a checklist. They definitely belong in your show note for any episode that has any of this kind of content at all, right at the very top or the bottom, or maybe both, depending on the length of your show notes. It should be spoken, a quick version at the start or end of each episode, and whenever you veer into that risky territory, right before or after you say that thing that might cause a problem, that's when you need that disclaimer. It should also be on your websites, in your footer, your privacy page, or you could even have a dedicated legal section or disclaimers page. Why all three? Well, because you want your disclaimers to be both visible and verifiable. If a listener comes along and challenges you, you can show that the disclaimer was spoken, printed, and published. Much easier to defend yourself under those circumstances. You don't have to make it awkward. A disclaimer could be very, very short. It could just say, "Hey, quick note, I'm not your lawyer. This is just general information, not advice. Now let's get into the subject." Say it at the top of the show. Put the longer version in the notes, link to your full policy on the website. Bang, you're done. So, how do you write that disclaimer the right way? It isn't hard, but writing one that actually works can take a little bit of intentionality. Worst thing you could do here is just to copy something from someone else's show or site and assume that it'll cover you, because their show isn't your show. Their risks aren't your risks. And honestly, you want to think this stuff through. It's important exercise to do the head work, the legal thinking work, I guess you could call it. And honestly, legalese isn't going to impress anyone. What's going to work best is clarity. Your disclaimer should be understandable by the audience and specific to your format and content. So here's what I recommend. Keep it in plain language. Be upfront about your limits. Better too many limits than not enough, right? And avoid vague phrases like "we're not responsible for anything ever." That'll look shady, and frankly, it'll just alienate your audience. So tailor the wording to the topics that you actually cover. And again, I've got that free guide that walks you through the process. You will learn how to identify which disclaimers you need, to customize the language for each type of content, and use them in all the right places. You can get it now by going to gordonfiremark.com/disclaimer guide. That's one word, disclaimer guide. All right, gordonfiremark.com, disclaimer guide. Now, if this episode is helping you think about your podcast more seriously and you like what I'm doing here on Legit Podcast Pro, I'd like to ask you a favor. Would you please help me spread the word? Share this episode with your podcasting friends. Recommend the show in your online communities. Link out to the YouTube video if you'd like to in your posts. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that little bell, the notify button, those kinds of things so you don't miss out on future episodes. That little bit of support really does help me make these episodes possible. These kinds of things that'll help you stay legit and level up your podcasting game. So share if you wouldn't mind. All right. You can go deeper with Easy Legal for Podcasters. If you've been listening to this show for a while or watching the show, you know I don't just talk about legal tips. I teach you how to use them. And inside my Easy Legal for Podcasters program, we go way deeper into everything you need to know to protect your show, your business, your brand. That includes structuring it like a real business, registering your copyrights and your trademarks to protect your content and your name of your show, setting up solid contracts for guests, co-hosts, and sponsors, those podcast prenups you hear me talking about, and dialing in your disclaimers, disclosures, and the documentation that you need so you're covered on every front. And if you want to see what the lessons inside the program look like, check out my secret video. One of the lessons from the program. It's free for you to watch right now for a limited time if you go over to gordonfiremark.com/levelup, LEVELUP. All right. So the bottom line for you today, if you don't have a disclaimer or disclaimers, or if you're just guessing with the ones you've got, you may be leaving yourself exposed. Podcasting is a lot of fun. It's impactful. You're an influencer. It can change lives. But all of those things are trouble. And it means also you're a business. So protect that business. Protect yourself, your personal assets, your family, all that stuff. Make sure you're getting that protection in place. Use that disclaimer guide, gordonfiremark.com/disclaimer guide, where you'll get your free guide to start using the right legal languages in the right places. All right, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you for joining me. I will catch you next time on Legit Podcast Pro. I've been Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. And until I see you next time, keep on creating, keep on growing, and keep it legit.